So at the end of part 2, we mentioned that I would try and mess with my baroreceptors in live time to see if I could change something about them. And let's pretend that I was laying on a stretcher. And here's my stretcher, here's me, and we'll call this position 1. And I have a machine that can measure my heart rate. And then I move to position 2, and I keep the same machine that can measure my heart rate. And then I go into position 3, and I still have that same little machine measuring my heart rate. What do you think is going to happen to my heart rate from position 1 to position 2, and then from position 2 to position 3? Is my heart rate going to change? Is nothing going to happen at all? Is it going to stay the same? Given what you know about baroreceptors now, let's stop and pause the video on your own and try to make a prediction. What would happen to me? What would happen to my heart rate, rather? So if we were to make a prediction and we call this position 1's heart rate x, and we wanted to ask what my heart rate would be at position 2 in relation to x, then if we look at the rest of my body, all this blood in the rest of my body, and here is my heart. Which way does the blood need to go in order to hit the baroreceptors? And remember, the baroreceptors they can be found in the aorta. They can also be found in between the external and internal carotid arteries. The blood would need to go this direction if it wanted to hit those baroreceptors. And if we were to draw like a force vector for gravity, gravity would be going this way. But what about in position 3? Well, all the rest of the blood in my body, we'll say it's all of this stuff, and there's my heart. The blood would need to go in this direction to hit the baroreceptors, but the gravity vector is going this way. So it's probably obvious to some of you that in position 2, the blood is going to be almost kind of like falling towards my baroreceptors effortlessly. But in position 3, it would be tough. I'd have to like pump it upwards. And so in position 2, I have a lot more what's called venous return, which is kind of a fancy way of saying I have a lot more blood coming back from my veins to my heart. And the more blood I get into my heart, the more blood I have inside of my aorta. That's Starling's law of the heart. The heart is going to pump what it gets. And in this situation, I wouldn't have as much venous return compared to position 2. Not that I wouldn't have any at all, of course I do, or I would die. But I won't have as much venous return as in position 2. So more venous return means more blood in the heart. More blood in the heart means more blood in the aorta. And what do we know about having too much blood, or not too much blood, but a lot of blood in the aorta? Well, when a lot of blood hits the aorta and it starts to fill up, the walls of the aorta will stretch like we've talked about before, and the baroreceptors on the aorta will fire, and they're going to send a parasympathetic message because when a lot of blood is in the aorta, then the baroreceptors know, well, the blood pressure must be too high. And so they're going to send this parasympathetic message back to the heart, and that would slow the heart rate down. And again, this situation would happen if I found myself in the predicament of having too much blood hitting my aorta too quickly. It's not like a long-term increase in blood pressure. This would be like a quick, jerky, reflexive increase in blood pressure, like a bolus of blood hitting my aorta strongly, almost coming out of nowhere. An example of how that could happen, albeit kind of a silly one, would be, let's say if I was on that stretcher like in position 2 and I had my head under my feet. We already talked about how I would have increased venous return and more blood would be flowing towards my heart. I would definitely have way more blood hitting my aorta at that point, which would increase blood pressure, therefore sending a parasympathetic message to the heart to slow it down. And you're probably guessing this already, but if we did the opposite of this and quickly spun my head upwards and put my feet down, then the opposite of this would happen. If my head were quickly tipped back up and my feet swung back underneath of me, then I would have decreased venous return as all the blood kind of pooled down towards my feet, and because of that I would have less stretch in the aorta, and if there's less blood moving through the aorta, which causes less stretch, and the walls of the aorta would kind of move in a little bit, kind of like how a garden hose would if you had water moving through it and it was kind of taut when you squeezed on the garden hose, but then when you let all the water come out, you were able to kind of push on it more because it's much more pliable. Same thing here. And then because of that, the baroreceptors will fire a sympathetic message, which would come back to the heart. And I have been saying aorta a lot, but these baroreceptors can be found in between the external and internal carotid arteries as well. And this sympathetic message would come back down to the heart, and it would tell the heart to speed up or increase the heart rate. And now I challenge you to pause this video and try it. You should go lay down for a minute and get a good resting heart rate going. And you can find that resting heart rate by, finding the pulse on yourself, counting how many beats there are in 15 seconds or 30 seconds. And if it was 30 seconds, you could multiply that number of beats by 2, and that would be how many beats per minute you're at right now. That would be your resting heart rate. And then stand on your head, or put your feet up against the wall. You kind of hang upside down, do whatever you want to do, and then measure your resting heart rate again. And I bet you it's going to be a lot lower. And then if you kind of quickly stand up and were to measure it again, you'll see that your pulse went up. It may be kind of hard to replicate because you're trying to do this with your fingers, and it's not, you're measuring your pulse with your fingers. It may not be the most sensitive thing in the world, but try it. It's fun. And then watch what we did.
So on my left, there's a guy named Mario wearing a purple tie, and he's watching the screen, and on the right-hand side, you can see a screenshot of what my heart rate was at when I was lying horizontally. And then they invert me, and once my heart rate stabilizes, you can see a little cord coming down from my right thumb. And on the screen here, on the right-hand side, you can see that my heart rate when I was inverted dropped to about 71 beats per minute from where it was at about 80. And then when he gives them the go-ahead, once he sees that it stabilizes, he's going to have them bring me back to that original position where they got my resting heart rate, let me stabilize for a sec, and then when he sees that it's ready, he's going to give them the go-ahead, and they're going to lift me up. If you watch carefully, you can see how they weren't paying attention and they almost dragged the whole apparatus off the chair. And on my right thumb, when the camera comes around here, you can see a little piece of green tape. That's the sensor attached to my thumb. That's what's measuring my heart rate. And as I'm standing up, you can see that it goes up to about 102 beats per minute from where it was. When I was inverted, it was as low as 70. When I was resting, it was about 80. And then when they tip me up, it increases significantly. And then they're going to drop me back down. You can see during this video that I move my head a little bit, partly because I was getting fairly dizzy from doing this. We had done multiple takes. But also, moving my head won't really change what's happening with the baroreceptors.